All right, so the meeting is recording. Thank you so much for attending, both to the faculty from the working group, as well as everyone who's here to listen to us today and chat with us. Brandon and I are really excited for this event. We think it's a really important way to, as I'm graduating and as Brandon's getting older, really transfer that knowledge, especially as the working group is ending, and as we're coming out of, this pandemic. And really needing to, reignite that student activism now that we'll have a little more time and room for it. So thank you so much, everyone. So the schedule for today is going to be the faculty and me and Brandon on the working group will present our presentation that we've been giving to a lot of different stakeholders at the university, which explains the content of the final report that we created. And then we'll have time for questions after that. And then me and Brandon will present on a student perspective about the activism that it took to create this group, and some other things that are happening on campus, as well as just some takeaways we have for future student activists. And then after that, we'll have a chance for questions and a discussion. So thank you so much, everyone, and off to Brandon to get it started. You are on mute, Brandon, I believe.
I was on mute. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. So thank you to Natalie for really pulling this together and all the faculty for joining us. So I'll go ahead and get started. Well, this presentation really is a culmination of conversations that we have all had in the last year as a follow-up to our June 2020 report, which was the first report that we released. And this was really delving deep into how to analyze some of the subjects we touched upon in that first report. Titled Transforming UConn to a Zero Carbon Campus, A Path Forward, the following slides will present the key ideas behind this report and the recommendations we have produced. And this is going to be, okay, there we go. So for some background, during the fall semester of 2019, undergraduate students mobilized to ask the university administration to take action on climate change. Because of this, there are some events that they coordinated. And what you see on your screen are just some of them that are listed and some of the photos of what occurred before these groups were formed. So before you are the list of student demands that were listed and what students wanted the administration to act upon. We do remind you that list of demands led to the creation of this committee through President Katsilas, and we have made substantial progress on some of them through this report, but there are also some items that we still need to work upon and others that we have not touched upon. So after that, we'll go into our timeline. So this is really how we start from where we started to where we are now. So in 2019, we had those student protests that you saw in slide 2 with the photos, with the demands. In October of that year, Katsilas created our group, the President's Working Group on Sustainability and the Environment. We like to call it PWGSE to not make it too long. In June 2020, we released our first report, which was planning for a zero carbon future. And now we're really going to focus this entire presentation from here on about the April 2021 report, which is Transforming UConn to a Zero Carbon Campus. So with that, I'll hand it off to Andrew.
My turn. Natalie, should we introduce ourselves?
Yes, that would be great, actually.
Okay, so I'm Angie Seth. I'm a professor in the geography department, and I'm a climate scientist. So I teach classes on climate science. And so in this talk, what I want to get across that's really important is that because the process that we're talking about is going to take 20 years, we're talking about zero carbon, implementing a zero carbon campus by 2040. So in order to do that over a 20-year time period, there are a lot of uncertainties involved. Technologies can change, the policy environment can change at different state and federal levels. Behaviors can change. We saw that very dramatically during the pandemic, right? And the costs are very uncertain. So because of all of these uncertainties, we have thought about just some basic principles to guide our decision-making through this 20-year process. So, excuse Excuse me. Oh, an ant just landed on me. Not sure exactly where that came from. So let me get to my notes here. So the principles then are as follows. UConn's decarbonization plan should contribute to stabilizing global climate at 1.5 degrees C of warming. That is the scientifically accepted target based on the increasing risks to human health, ecosystems, and rising oceans, with warming, every little bit of warming above that level. So given this, the members of the working group affirm the target of zero carbon by 2040 that was set in our June report in 2020. And that is the main priority to guide UConn's infrastructure investments for the future. So we're really pushing for zero carbon by 2040. And so in order to do that, the next 10 years are really critical because CO2 has cumulative effects on climate. The emissions reductions that are implemented earlier will have a greater effect to limit Earth's temperature increase. So for that reason, postponing emissions, for example, waiting for technological progress and other things, really is not advisable. We must commit now to ambitious and steady reductions towards zero carbon by 2040. Another thing that's essential is that the scenarios presented here are for the Storrs campus, but all regional campuses should be involved in this process over the next 20 years. Particularly, we have colleagues and students at Avery Point and Stanford that are really vulnerable to sea level rise and coastal storms. For UConn to contribute meaningfully towards stabilizing global climate to safe levels, we must reduce our actual emissions without the purchase of offsets. And this is a tricky issue. Emissions reductions outside of UConn's control are considered offsets. And paying others so UConn can continue to pollute really does not contribute to a global strategy to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. And they can further exacerbate environmental injustices. When making decisions about campus infrastructure, we should be asking these two questions. Would global targets be met if most organizations took this step? And with this decision, are we shifting the burdens of climate change to those who are less responsible, more vulnerable, or not able to speak for themselves? And with that, I'll pass it off to the next. Is that...
Hi, folks. Yep. My name is Jason Vokoun. I'm a professor in the Department of Natural Resources and the Environment, and I'm currently serving as the director of the cross-college interdisciplinary environmental sciences major. So my section here is we're going to switch gears a little bit and sort of talk about the key actions or the big takeaways, if you will. So the first one here we feel is a pretty large one. We recommend that the university should publicly commit to retiring the Storrs campus fossil fuel energy infrastructure. So that's, you'll hear more details about this later on what that energy infrastructure is, but by 2040. So we feel, doing this publicly is important, right? It sets a vision. It sets a goal that is we can be held accountable to as an organization and an institution. What that does mean then is that we need to be strategic about maintaining or upgrading and replacing the fossil fuel infrastructure. So a lot of this are buried steam lines that currently heat a lot of campus in the central part of campus. And we need to stop kind of replacing those, and because it creates what's called stranded assets. And stranded assets are investments that you make that are going to, you're not going to fully recoup your cost by the time that we predict that we're going to change to renewable energy infrastructure. So we need to be smart about that. Next slide, Brandon. This next key action is it's an accounting thing. We need to distinguish between what are truly additional costs versus costs that UConn would absorb anyway in the absence of a zero carbon plan. And this may seem like kind of a no-brainer, but it's actually really complicated. So when we do these kinds of building conversions, these are going to be bundled with other renovations. We might be fixing a building's roof. We might be replacing windows, and there are savings that can be had by doing, bundling these kinds of activities. But it's really important that sustainability be afforded fair accounting, right? We can't put those other costs into the bucket of zero carbon. That's going to inflate what is already an expensive process. The third key action or recommendation that we made is to task a high-level administrative officer with ensuring progress. And given our understanding of UConn's hierarchy, we think this should be somebody at the level of an associate vice president or an AVP. So that's somebody that is in the quote unquote C-suite, that is in the room where real decisions are made and has the authority to influence those. We think it's important that that this person isn't situated underneath or embedded within other aspects of the university. They need to have the ability to liaise and to work across the mission areas of the university. A lot of this work is necessarily going to impact facilities and other offices of planning, but this needs to sort of have the authority to work in a number of arenas. So we really see two main reasons why this is important. And one is the just mentioned kind of internal communication and leadership within the institution. The other is to have the bandwidth or the time and the authority to broker deals on behalf of UConn. So UConn is unlikely to do this on its own. We're going to partner with federal programs, with federal agencies, with state agencies and state programs. There's going to be a lot of negotiations with utility companies and just a whole business aspect of this that we currently in UConn don't have somebody who that's their job. And so this recommendation is really to have someone have this as their primary purpose. So I'm going to stop there and hand off to my co-author, Natalie.
All right, so next we have a few points that are more about transparency and accountability. So the first one is establishing a standing presidential committee comprising of faculty and student members. So right now the working group has been in place for something like a year and a half, but we are now sort of wrapping up. We were a temporary body, and we in this report are asking for a more permanent body that would assist in the decision-making processes over the next, 20 years throughout this process, and make sure that students and faculty have a legitimate say in what's happening and are able to communicate that out to the larger community. So, monitoring progress, evaluating alternatives, and assessing tactical decisions for the short and the intermediate term. Next slide when you are ready. Great. And then just in general, transparency and accountability is a really key part of this process, and making sure that it continues in the way that, everyone in this community is looking for. So, that involves clear communication to all stakeholders of the university. Right now we have information on the president's website, but continuing that and making sure, documents and meeting minutes and all of that are available. We're asking for biannual town halls from the president's office and other, high-ranking people, whoever's, able to make it, just to keep people updated on what's going on and allow a chance for feedback. And then increase funding for existing sustainability efforts, adding a justice lens to the sustainability efforts that exist right now. And then just in general, good starting point is sharing this report publicly in a timely manner. So we're still having it finalized, but that will hopefully happen in the next few months. All right, and I'll cover this slide. So something else we want to point out, a lot of times this conversation is focused on how much it's going to cost us. And the two numbers of money and carbon emissions. But we want to recognize that there's a lot more to it, and there are a lot of co-benefits for the university. So there are research co-benefits. As you can imagine, having service learning available, having more research on our own campus on this, really emerging topic can be really beneficial for drawing students to the school, as well as just for the students on campus already. Education and engagement co-benefits, very similar, right? Having a living lab, stuff like that. I also want to point out that for professors and people doing research, as well as, students, this is a great opportunity too. And of course, it's going to increase student engagement in a lot of different ways. Also, university reputation. Right now, we're known as a leader in sustainability. And really, to maintain that leadership, we need to take radical action on this topic, and really take a stance, take a strong position, which again will benefit student recruitment, which is always good for the university. Yeah, next slide, Brandon. All right. I think it's off to the next person.
Yes. So,
Great.
yeah. So, hi, my name is Kathy Segerson. I'm a faculty member in the economics department. I'm an environmental economist, and I also serve as an associate dean in the graduate school. Turning to some of the specifics here, as you can imagine, we obviously talked about the commitment to a zero carbon campus by 2040, but there are questions about how do you get there and what is it going to cost? And so just by way of a little bit of background for the students who might not be aware, what the university did was they hired a consulting firm, BVH, to do some studies of what are the possible ways to reduce emissions on campus over a particular time frame, and what would those actions cost. So if you look at our report, you'll see that it's accompanied by some appendices, and the appendices, many of them reflect the work that was done by BVH as well as the UConn staff on trying to come up with these cost estimates of these pathways, as well as emissions reductions pathway, estimates that would go along with those. So there are a number of different plans and possible strategies that are discussed in those reports in the appendices. Some of them are reaching zero carbon not by 2040, but say by 2050. But in this presentation, and when we presented our results of our report to President Katsouleas, as well as the Board of Trustees subcommittees, we focused on one particular plan, namely the zero carbon by 2040 plan. So I only mention that because if you haven't been part of the process and you look at the appendices, you might wonder, why do we have all this other information in there about these other plans, like zero by 2050, as well as some peak plans and things like that. So that's just to say there was a process that got us to the point where we focused on this zero carbon by 2040 plan that we'll talk about today. So the question is, what exactly does it entail? And the first thing to note is that it, of course, entails all of the continued energy conservation measures that are part of the Climate Action Plan. The Climate Action Plan was something that previous presidents of the university committed to reducing UConn's carbon emissions over a period of time. The Climate Action Plan does not get us to zero carbon by 2040. It doesn't even get us to zero carbon by 2050. And so clearly what we needed something beyond the Climate Action Plan to get us to where we are committed to being. So as Jason mentioned, part of the plan is the phased retirement of the fossil fuel infrastructure on campus by 2040. And the big part of that is the phased retirement of the central utility plant and the associated steam lines, as well as some of the standalone fossil fuel boilers that are around campus. And so if we take those offline, gradually take those offline, or eventually take those offline by 2040, we of course need to replace both the electricity and the heating and cooling that they currently provide. And so where would the electricity come from? Where would the heating and cooling come from if we aren't getting it from the central utility plant? So it has 2 points, two parts. One is the thermal conversion for heating and cooling, and the plan includes conversion of the heating and cooling systems in all the buildings from steam to hot water, where that hot water would be provided primarily through geothermal energy with electric heat pumps. So that's the thermal conversion part. And then for the electrical part, it's a switch to renewable electrical power. And that also has 2 parts to it. One is some direct investment in renewable generation, either on or near campus, so mainly solar. So some additional solar capacity on campus through rooftops and parking lots, about 6 megawatts of that. And as well as some off-campus and or possibly depot campus utility level solar that would be possibly in conjunction with a purchase power agreement, but allows for a bigger scale, more on the lines of 30 megawatts of electricity capacity through that. But that's still not going to replace the electricity of the cup. And so what we envision here is increased purchases of electricity from Eversource. And the assumption is that that electricity would be renewably sourced, so that we would be purchasing renewable electricity from Eversource. And just one thing before we go to the next slide, to this slide, Brandon, is just to make the point that in order to do that, we need to invest in new electrical infrastructure, new substations, new distribution lines on campus. Okay, next slide, Brandon. So just real quickly, what this slide does is to just show that when BVH was preparing their plan, they were actually looking at individual parts of the campus and thinking about what the conversion would have to be in the individual parts. And part of their plan was also about what to do first. So you don't have to do everything at once. So you would presumably want to identify where to start and what to do over the short run. We'll come back to that point in a minute. So next slide, Brandon. So the plan, of course, would get us the down to 0 carbon by 2040. You can see that in the left-hand graph relative to the cap. It's got a much lower emissions per year. And of course, over time, that means much lower cumulative emissions. And Angie talked about the importance of the cumulative emissions as well. So these graphs just show what the emissions trajectories are under the plan versus cap. So next slide, Brandon. So the real question is, what does this cost? And so BVH, when they prepared their cost estimates, basically identified what the cost would be of making the conversions that we have identified that were identified in the plan, as well as what the cost would be of continuing under cap. And we felt, as Jason talked about, that it was really important that we identify not just total cost, but we identify what we think of as incremental costs. So costs above and beyond what we would have incurred anyway. And so because of that, we added another cost estimate, which is what would we be doing anyway? What would, if we were just trying to have a normal maintenance plan? And so what this table does is it presents the cost estimates for under that normal maintenance plan, under the climate action plan, and then under the 0 carbon plan. So those are the first 3 columns, and breaking them down into capital costs as well as operating costs as the different rows there. And you can see the associated emissions avoided as well. And then the last 2 columns are really the important ones here, because these are the estimates relative to the what would have been incurred anyway, or what would have been incurred under the cap. And so these are the incremental costs that we think are the important ones to focus on when thinking about what is it really going to cost in order to reach this 0 carbon goal by 2040. So you can see they're on the order of billions of dollars, so it's not insignificant. These are substantial costs. And so we need to think about where these costs would come from. And that's where some of the partnering with external stakeholders in the state and all would come into play, presumably, hopefully, get some partnerships that would allow funding for this kind of transformative investment. Next slide, Brandon. So this, I think we'll turn it over to Alex now.
Yeah, so thanks, Kelly. I'm Alex Agrios. I'm an associate professor in environmental engineering, and I'm also part of UConn's Center for Clean Energy Engineering. And a lot of my research has been on solar cells. So actually, Brandon, could you back up to the map, please? Because I want to maybe also give, I think maybe for this audience, it would be good to give a little bit of a broad overview of what's happening here. So BVH divided the campus into a number of districts. I think there are about 18 districts. What we have currently is one big central utility plant, the CUP, that burns natural gas to generate electricity for campus, and the waste heat from that is used to provide steam that's piped through a network of pipes through most of campus, but it doesn't reach the outermost buildings because it's too far to pipe steam efficiently. So the outerlying buildings have their own little built-in systems, which are not very efficient. The new system that's being designed would shut down that utility plant, and we would be buying electricity from Eversource mostly, except we'd get some solar. And then each of these districts would have its own mini plant. And most of those plants would be connected with geothermal wells. So we have wells dug in the ground, and that's because in the ground, if you go a couple hundred feet down, the temperature is pretty stable year round at about 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So in the wintertime, that's a lot warmer than the outdoor air, and that's good for trying to pump heat out to heat a building. And in the summer, it's a nice cool temperature for doing cooling. So they divide into districts and plan to kind of process for the timeline of converting them. It's not really feasible to do it all at once. It's too much construction, it's too much cost, and etc. So the plan that BVH developed kind of spirals from the outside in and spends the first decade or so going around these outerlying districts, and then kind of tackles the core in the second decade. So one thing we think should be that should be reevaluated, because you can see that most of the buildings are concentrated in the core, and that's where most of the emissions are from. And it's kind of hard to shut down that whole central system. You can't turn it off until you've replaced everything that currently serves. So, but we think it could be possible to kind of do a tighter spiral in the core and take care of where most of the emissions are earlier in the process, and then maybe kind of mop up the outerlying districts in the last several years of the project instead of doing that first. And the point of that is just to reduce our emissions as quickly as possible. So it's not just about getting to zero by 2040. It's, the most we can eliminate, the earliest, the more that reduces our cumulative emissions. So we think there's kind of a better sequence that can be done in the plan that was developed. Can you go back, Brandon, to my slide here? Thanks. So that's the first thing that we think ought to be reevaluated as planning moves forward. And what BVH made anyway was supposed to be a starting point, and they knew that there's going to be a lot more work to kind of flesh it out. So that's one thing to look at as things move forward. And the other point is about thermal storage. So we looked at some other universities that have put out plans of their own, and we looked especially at Princeton. Stanford already completed a transformation along these lines. And both of those involve a lot of thermal storage. So Princeton's maybe a better example for us. It's similar climate to here and kind of a similar kind of plan to what we're trying to do here. They also are in the very early stages. That's just, they've released a plan. But their plan has two different kinds of thermal storage. And one of them is like a giant hot water tank. And that's already helpful because you can have like the heat pumps running all night long, storing up heat in these tanks. And then during the day when people need that heat for hot water, etc., you can pull it out of these hot water tanks that you've been storing up over time. And that means you need fewer wells to meet that heat. So you can, when peak loads hit, you don't have to have a giant number of wells supplying that at the time. You can be storing it up over longer times and use fewer wells. So that can be a more efficient way to do things. So that's kind of for like day-to-day storage of thermal energy. But they do something else different, which is to drill the wells much deeper into the ground so that they're deep into bedrock. And they actually use the bedrock under the campus as seasonal thermal storage. So that means, let's see, over the summertime, as they're cooling buildings, they're dumping heat from the buildings into the bedrock and warming it up over the whole summer. And then when you get to winter, you have nice warm bedrock that you can be pulling heat out of to heat the buildings. And as you do that, you're cooling the bedrock, and come summer, you've got cool bedrock for cooling. So you actually get heat storage from season to season that way. And that's a pretty interesting process. And so BVH didn't look at thermal storage at all in their plan. There's none of that in there. And we should take a serious look to see if either or both kinds of this would work. I mean, Princeton seemed to find that this bedrock seasonal thermal storage was feasible and economical for them to do, and we should see if that also makes sense under our campus. It'll depend on our geology and other factors, but it's something we should definitely take a look at. Next slide, please. So we had this 20-year plan, and we wanted to kind of deliver to the administration what we think are the main things to be focusing on in the near term. And one of them is to get going on a lot more electrical capacity, because the heart of the project is electrification. We're doing all our heating and cooling now using electricity, and we're going to need a lot more electrical power. And in addition to that, we're going to stop generating our own electrical power. So we have to bring in everything to replace what we generate, and we're going to need even more for all the heating and cooling needs. So the plan from BVH envisions this 100 megawatt substation that would come online around 2030, 2031. And that's going to be a big thing to build and construct. And so UConn will need to be getting on that soon to start the planning process, because that's a prerequisite for the whole rest of the plan. We have to have electrical power before we can do all the rest of it. The second thing is that a lot of buildings that are served by the central utility plant now, they have steam supplied to them, and they use that for heat. And a lot of those buildings, so the future system will not have steam. There will be hot water being piped around instead, which is obviously less hot. And a lot of the buildings now have hot water radiators inside the building, but they use the steam to make hot water that they pipe around the building, but they make hot water that's hotter than what the future system will provide. So if you then switch them onto this new hot water source, the buildings will be a little chilly because the water is not hot enough for what their heating system was designed for. So those buildings will need their internal heating systems converted, and that can be a pretty expensive thing to do. To keep the costs down, we should plan on doing those conversions together with general building renovations. And a lot of the buildings in the central campus are old. They're going to need renovating sometime anyway. And so we need to, number one, plan on converting the thermal system when they're renovated. But that also means that when we're planning when to renovate a building, we have to time that around this whole infrastructure plan. So, you know, you don't just, oh, it's getting old, let's do it now. It should be planned out relative to when this new system will be built and when buildings will need to be connected to them. So we need to be smart about kind of planning it all in an integrated way. And finally, one thing that the university can start doing right away is putting up solar. We've got very little solar power on campus, and you know, that's a very real that's a real thing that's providing clean energy. It's displacing fossil fuels right away. It also has the benefit of being highly visible. People can see it. People can see what we're doing. So BVH identified about 6 megawatts we could get on campus. I think about one of those megawatts was from building rooftops, and another 5 from canopies that could be installed over parking lots. And we'd like to get another 30 megawatts from a bit farther away. So on Depot campus, it looks like you could put up about 10 megawatts right now. If one day some of these old falling apart buildings could be torn down, you could probably put another 20 megawatts there. Now that's kind of a historical preservation district, so that wouldn't be easy to do. If not, maybe somewhere else off campus, but not too far away, we could try to put up another 20 megawatts. And there's PPA noted here. That's a power purchase agreement, which is a financial way to rig it so that we don't have to pay all the capital costs now. Another company could do that and we buy the power from them over time. That's more kind of about how to work the financing of the whole thing. But between those two things, we could get, significant displacement of the power we're getting now from fossil sources. And it would be nice if people could see that we're doing it.
My name is Mike Willig. I'm the director of the Institute of the Environment and a professor in ecology and evolutionary biology. And my research interests focus on climate-induced disturbances and their effects on populations and communities of plants, animals, and microbes. So as acknowledgements, the working group would like to especially recognize 4 levels of contribution. The first is the president, President Katsileas, his leadership in convening this working group into dedicating UConn to a pursuit of a path that leads to a sustainable, desirable, and just future is really important. And equally, we'd like to thank the students whose activism and passion catalyzed the formation of the working group and dedicated us to searching for a path forward. Secondly, there's an adage that says many shoulders make light work. And in that regard, the working group has benefited greatly from support by the university operations staff and extramural consultants. They've been really invaluable partners in providing data, understanding, and perspectives to support and inform the deliberations that we've had. And it really was a Herculean task given the amount of time that was available for doing all of this. And they certainly rose to the challenge. Also, Laura Cruikshank, she's the master planner and chief architect for the university and is an associate vice president for university planning, design, and construction. Had an amazing sense of organization, knowledge, and coordination to facilitate our actions. Her support was invaluable, if not essential, to all that we've been able to accomplish, and she really deserves special recognition. And finally, the faculty and staff members on the working group have all been impressed with the depth and breadth of knowledge, dedication, and hard work that's characterized the performance of 2 undergraduate students of the working group, Natalie and Brandon, both of whom are here. So hopefully I'm not embarrassing them too much by saying this to them yet again. But frankly, we've learned, I'm sure we've learned more from them than they've learned from us in this process. And we're incredibly proud of their contributions to the working group. And from our perspective, they epitomize the intellectual capacity and conviction of an entire generation of students, all of those on this WebEx meeting that weren't members of the working group. And always they, and you, the students, represent our best hope for a just and sustainable future. So we're really grateful for all that you've done to make the working group be formed and dedicated to achieving this path forward. And at this point, I think I'll turn it back over to Natalie, who will coordinate questions, I think, from the group. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mike. And yes, I really appreciate, as always, all the working members, and I especially appreciate the faculty members coming today to give us a resource to bounce ideas off of and ask questions to. And they are leaving after this question period, most of them at least. Y'all are welcome to stay, of course. So get your questions in now. But yeah, so we'll turn over to that question period. I know that was a lot of information. This is being recorded as long as it saves to my computer, as space on my computer. So you'll have time to, look back on it if you want, but feel free to ask any questions of them that you'd like. And me and Brandon will stick around, so you can ask questions of us later. So you can do that by speaking up, or you can type in the chat as well.
I think.
Hey Natalie, it's Chase through Kate's computer. But I'm a little bit curious about the parking canopies. So are you going to build a whole new structure over these parking lots in a sense for to add solar energy or to harness solar energy from them? And how much would these structures block rain or the natural hydrological structure as well from getting to that area? Or
yeah, it's a good question. So I guess yes, there would be a structure built on top of the parking lots to collect sunlight. I mean, already parking lots are impervious surfaces, right? Rain that falls on them is is a problem. It's a runoff problem to deal with. So it doesn't really change it to build a different kind of structure over a parking lot. Right? I don't think it's an issue so much for water. It is an issue we've been told when you get to winter months and you don't have the sun melting the parking lot, that it can be turned into a hockey rink if you're not careful. So there's some engineering around how to sort of build them in a good way. And I think at least one of the parking lots on campus was sort of already built to be solar ready, like it has some sort of drainage and electrical connections ready to go, but most of them do not.
Well, I'm a bit curious because the one near Towers is pervious asphalt, and the one near the field house and the main part of campus is pervious concrete. And then we got a few pavers. So if we are putting canopies over them, would that be kind of hurting our current goals on those as well? Not that it's not, I think that solar canopies are a bit better than if you can reroute the water into a more natural area, it'd probably work fine, but.
That's a great question. And yeah, if you put a solar canopy over a pervious parking lot, I honestly don't know what's done in that case. I don't know if water can just be routed onto the parking lot and infiltrate through, or what. I would think that's how you'd want to do it, but I don't know, to be honest. That's a great question.
So can I say, I think that the pervious parking areas are, they probably aren't planning to put solar panels on them for that very reason right away. And where they are, they can, there's a lot of work in and around the parking lots to establish, what do they call those, rain gardens and stuff, where they can, have the water directed into them for recharging groundwater. So I think that the campus planners are really focused on water management and groundwater. So I'm sure that that's being considered, but it's a really good question.
So I shared a couple images there just to give a sense that it's not a complete roof. So when we say a canopy, they tend to be linear structures that go down a row of two cars, and then there's openings. So you can think of them more as like the thing that keeps the rain off you at the gas station. So it's not necessarily connected to another building, and it's not a contiguous roof. And so there are parts. Some of them are designed to drain water to a gutter system that could then be routed. Some of them just splash off. So there are different design elements or options there. But I also agree with Angie that where we would be looking to do this, there's a scale and a scope to it. And so the small parking lots that we have pervious, those aren't going to be high priority targets for solar canopies anyway. We're really looking at the acreage here. We want the 10 to 40 acre parking lots.
Thank you so much for that answer. This is Caitlin, so from the same computer. Thank you all for that information. I just had a few questions on, the first is kind of external funding. So you mentioned that some of the main costs or some of this would be hopefully from external funders and supporters of the university. I'm curious on if there's any more information you can give on who that might be, what that might entail, if that might be necessary for the university to move forward with a commitment to this. My second question is kind of towards the commitment scale, or thinking about that. Where is the university in terms of implementing a permanent position that I think Dr. Vokoun mentioned as kind of a liaison for implementation, and also just towards the working group. So I guess next steps, where are we in terms of funding the working group and the liaison?
Well, I guess I could say a couple things.
Yeah.
So obviously the working group makes recommendations to the president, and it's his purview to accept, reject, modify those in consult, and also present them then to the Board of Trustees. And the Board of Trustees is sort of the governing body for the university. and they would ultimately, in consultation with the president, need to make sort of the decisions about what would be funded and the timing for how those things would be funded. I think that the working group had really a broad charge that didn't sort of dig into the details very much, because that was sort of beyond the scope and time of the working group. But I think our hope was, at least in terms of external funding, is both the federal landscape for support of green energy has changed tremendously over the past year. And our hope is that there will be many infrastructural kind of motivations that entities, state government, private industries, and whatnot will have to invest in green energy. And this will help to some extent reduce the cost of the plan that it's a very expensive plan, but the plan we put forward to achieve the goals of sustainability and carbon reductions. And that the state similarly is on a path to reducing its carbon emissions tremendously. And so we're obviously we are a state agency. And so part of our goals parallel those of the state. So we're hoping that they will recognize that and help support us in moving forward as well. And then, then there's sort of 3A and 3B. 3A is that we hope that this vision that we've set out and the passion that you all students have communicated will allow us to seek perhaps philanthropic support to help highlight UConn's dedication to a sustainable future and to be really an even stronger leader in how to walk the talk of being a green campus and a sustainable campus. And also, various federal agencies will also be providing, well, hopefully we'll be opening up kind of grant-related opportunities that UConn could apply for. So all of this is uncertain. That's part of the risk of making a long-term strategic plan. But we hope what those will do will effectively reduce the gross estimates that we now have of costs and make them even less than perhaps we've projected them to be.
Can I add to that? Thanks, Mike. I was at the Board of Trustees meeting yesterday, and the president talked about our report in his remarks to the board, and said that the university is, that this report, he talked about the 2040 commitment, and that over the summer, there's going to be a group working on reviewing the recommendations and seeing, how we can move forward with them. And Marilda Gandara, who is a Board of Trustees member and chair of the Buildings, Grounds, and Environment Committee, which is a very important committee in the Board of Trustees with regard to everything that happens on campus operations. She is also planning to have a subgroup review the recommendations and look at next steps over the next month or two, as she said. So I'm waiting to hear how these things actually are going to be working. But given this larger context that Mike is talking about, with the federal government talking about, trillions of dollars in infrastructure plans and the American Family Recovery Act, there is potentially substantial money that is going to be made available to help the country reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And so, but UConn, by putting a stake in the ground and saying, we are going to lead on this, and this is what we plan to do, we will be in really a great position to jump on whatever funds become available. And also by having a liaison person ready to help us do that will be really critical. So right now, none of these things exist. The recommendations have just been made. And so I encourage the students to really follow the discussion that's going on and keep up the pressure, because, there is resistance in doing these things, if only because they're new and different from what has been done in the past, right? So anytime there's a shift towards something new, and it's a little bit hard or we need some new expertise to do it, there's going to be resistance. And so the students keeping up pressure will help make it happen.
I wanted to add one other thing on this question that I think it's important to recognize that the students are too young to, they weren't even born when UConn 2000 was, the UConn 2000 program was put in place. But, that transformed the UConn campus. And for those of us who've been around for a long time, well, probably there's nobody on this call who's been around maybe that long except for me, but it really made a significant difference in the campus. And it was a huge investment that the state made in transforming the campus. And I think we titled our report Transforming the Campus for a reason, because I think it's that similar kind of commitment to transform the campus that's needed. And I hope that the UConn 2000 experience will serve as an example that can be followed in terms of trying to pursue state support, state help, partnership for the kind of transformation we're talking about here.
Yeah. So, I'd like to add another comment is that this will ultimately depend upon our ability to communicate our individual values and our collective values. And it does come at a cost. And, every dollar that one spends for A can't be spent for B. So there will be real costs that are involved here. But what I think that the challenge will be to communicate how our values demand, essentially, that those costs be allocated effectively so that so that we can renew our commitment to stewarding the planet in an effective way, and that we can create a more just future for society as a consequence of that. So ultimately, it's how we follow our values and regulating the money that goes in and out of our purse. And ultimately, those are hard decisions to make. I'm glad I don't have to make them. But my values are clear, and I think that we need to do everything we possibly can to make it happen. And as Angie said, as new technologies come into play, and given the past investments from the state, hopefully we can make this a reality, even within the timelines, which are very aggressive with the timelines that we set forth.
So, hi, I'm Sam Janowski from Sierra Club, and I've just been listening this whole time, but really want to congratulate you on putting this together, setting a higher standard for the university to shoot for, and happy to use our network. If you want to share this information with our network, write an article and a link to the report to our for our newsletter and to send out to our supporters in any way that you feel that would be helpful. I want to support you in this because this is incredible work, and it's really, showing what it means to lead by example. Should the university follow this path, and could be a really exciting development for Connecticut.
Thank you. So the report right now is close to its final form, but we still have we still have a few Board of Trustees, Faculty Senate, things like that to go through. So hopefully in the next couple of months it will be finalized, and we'll have the green light to share it more widely. And definitely, like at least as a student member, I'd be really interested in some of that larger Connecticut sharing for sure. Thank you so much for that offer.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I just wanted to thank you all for your responses as well. And I wanted to mention, Chase and I are on the EcoHusky student group. So we've been following all your developments, and it's wonderful to see that there has at least been a temporary committee working towards these things and echoing student concerns. And then Chase had a follow-up question.
Yeah, Kathleen, I actually was on the subcommittee. I was the intern for the subcommittee bonding co-chair this year, so I got to hear all about UConn 2020 and the bonding allocations for that. And I would also like to discuss. I know you guys sort of talked about regional campuses a bit, but how are you how did you take into account, let's say, Avery Point, and then we got the Hartford campus, the Stanford campus, which are in urban areas, and the law school, and even UConn Health? How are they going to progress towards renewable, clean energy that is not emitting carbon emissions by 2040? Like UConn Health is going to be receiving millions of dollars, and they could really be a demonstration to the whole Hartford area towards renewable energy, and the Hartford campus as well.
So I can kind of field some of this. There's a level of technical knowledge that I'm incomplete on, but out of our regionals, Avery Point does have some on-campus fossil fuel infrastructure. Some of the other regionals are just embedded within a grid. And so in those cases, it's really going to be purchasing renewable electricity as it becomes available, right? There are energy conservation measures we can do within the buildings that we own or operate. But some of those smaller regional campuses they're not generating electricity to begin with. They're consumers. And so that is going to be reliant on the grid becoming greener over time. Avery Point does have some generation capacity, and so there's something similar to what we're talking about. It can either join the grid and retire that fossil fuel infrastructure, or replace with solar and geothermal and do a miniature version of what we've laid out for the Storrs campus. Avery Point, I think, also though brings a whole host of other issues. We have the two regionals, Avery Point and then Stanford, are going to be susceptible to coastal storms and increasingly sea level rise, and so there's another, I think, another layer here that will have to take a whole group and investigation to really think about for properties that are at or near sea level.
There's also, to complement what Jason said, there's also ongoing activities about wind energy in Long Island Sound. So the Avery Point campus, at least, and perhaps others, have been actively involved in investigating how they might be partners in the development of wind power. And again, it's unlikely that the university will be the owner of the windmills and will be using that directly, but that there will perhaps be a consortium of users and operators that will provide clean energy to the university. So that's another untapped area that those regional campuses in the coastal areas might be able to take advantage of quite effectively.
But I want to also add that our plan for UConn Storrs, where we focus our report, still relies on buying a lot of power from Eversource. So we're really relying on Eversource meeting their promise to decarbonize the grid. We're really counting on being able to buy electricity that's carbon free. And a place like UConn Health at Farmington, they sure use a lot of energy there, but it's mostly just bought from the grid. So if the grid decarbonizes, that part of it sort of gets taken care of sort of by Eversource without us having to do a lot. So a lot of why we focused on Storrs is because we do have this whole plant generating our own power, but with fossil sources. So that whole thing needs to be redone, and that's maybe a bigger infrastructure shift than the other campuses will need. But also that's kind of what we had the time and focus to work on, and we kind of said in our report that people need to look at the other campuses too, but that was sort of outside the scope of what our group did over this time frame.
Right, and there should be faculty from those campuses involved and students. The other thing that really hasn't been mentioned about the regional campuses is they do have buildings and heating and cooling needs, right? So the HVAC infrastructure on those campuses can be modified to use heat pumps, just as we're planning at UConn at Storrs, and that should be doable over the next 20 years as renovations are needed. So
hi everyone, thank you so much for presenting. I really appreciate your time, and it's been really interesting following your work as a group. I don't know if someone already mentioned this earlier or answered this, but I think Caitlin was just talking about how I don't know, sorry. We were just talking about how like this is technically like a temporary group of people on campus working on this. I don't know if there's any plans on having a permanent group, just because there's a lot of knowledge among all of you and a lot of motivation as well. And I don't know. I don't know what if there are any plans of making this like a permanent group, or if there's anything. I know that it's very tiring and you'll have put in a lot of work, but I was just wondering if there is like a long-term plan, or if you know of that happening.
So in our recommendations, we addressed that a little bit. We recommend a standing committee. So it would look similar to the working group, but we might add, term limits. Obviously, we'd be replenishing students, which didn't happen as much with this group. And that's really the way that we would do that. There's still a lot of wiggle room with it, and it has to be decided and it has to be implemented. And that's something I think students should definitely like keep in mind with your activism and watch out for. And then also that liaison position that we've mentioned.
Yeah, we were kind of hoping the president would keep the band together for a while more, but when we met with him, he kind of told us, yeah, once you hand in this report, you're done. Thank you. Oh, okay. So yeah, that's why we recommended at least some process. It doesn't, it doesn't have to be us, but to keep something like this going that reports to a high level to keep informing the process.
But again, so the next steps are really in the president and the board of trustees' hands over the summer. And so if they do not, create a new standing committee, that's something that the students can press for, right? It's the reason this committee was formed was because of the students. And so if it's pressure from the students that makes these things happen.
Graduating, but I will come back if you guys need it.
All right, Mara. Call into the Board of Trustees meetings as a public, they have a period for public comment at the beginning of every meeting. And it's like, if they hear from students that students want this to happen, it will make an impression on them for sure. So the next board meeting is in June.
Just wanted to mention, yeah, EcoHusky will be there, and we'll try to get as many students as we can. Thank you guys for sharing this knowledge, and also Natalie and Brandon for keeping us in the loop.
Great.
All right, are there any last questions? And if you do have further questions for this group, I will send a follow-up email with all this information and maybe convince everyone else to give their emails as well. So any last questions before we let everyone get off with their days? And then Brandon and I have a second portion to this as well for students and outside groups.
Yeah, I just want to thank the students for everything that you do. It's really, you make this happen. And so we're really proud of you, and keep up the good work.
All right, so if there's no more questions, faculty, feel free to stay, of course, but you are also free to leave. We can take like a 1-minute break, just, get up, get some food, something like that. And then we can come back, and Brandon and I have some beautiful infographics that I designed recently. And we can talk a little bit about power mapping and student activism on campus. All right, thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Natalie and Brandon.
Thank you all, and congratulations on such great accomplishments here. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
All right, so we'll see you guys in 1 minute. Hello. I love the 2-person couch situation.
Hello, yes, we were very casually listening.
As you should.
Yeah.
Let me pause the recording. I'm so scared of this recording. I'm like scared. Okay, I'm gonna press the stop button.
Yeah, we'll definitely send it.